But with that, I would like to turn it over to Michelle and David.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
All right. It was March, and the courts in Massachusetts were closing their physical doors. But no one wanted that to be closing of the courthouses themselves. People still needed access. What you're going to hear about today is what grew out of that need and what originated from a letter from our Chief Justice of the Supreme Judicial Court, who asked everyone to think not, how can we not do this, but rather, what if? So what we're going to do today is, and I'm David Colarusso.
And I'm Michelle Bernstein with Code for Boston.
And I'm with Suffolk University Law School. And what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about what the project is. We're going to talk about how it happened and how that collaboration, because it's a very collaborative project, ended up working out. We're going to talk about some of what our constraints were, and then we're going to talk about our successes, and then have time for, hopefully some time for some questions and discussion. And I'm going to do talking here for about the first half, and then I'm going to pass it off to Michelle for the latter half. So what is the project? So the project is an attempt to make court forms accessible to people entirely on their phones. So this was happening right at peak COVID, when all the courts were physically closed and the Commonwealth went into something approaching a lockdown. We didn't call it a lockdown, but it was effectively a lockdown. And what that meant was that people couldn't get what they needed to the court. Massachusetts does not have a very mature electronic filing process. So although there are some court forms you could file, for pro se litigants, that is to say people without attorneys, it was very difficult to get your day in court or to get something to court. And although the courts were physically closed, they were still hearing emergency matters. And it was those emergency matters that we wanted to have a way to help people get there. So what we ended up doing was spinning up a set of online interactive forms that were not just your regular run-of-the-mill fillable PDFs. The idea is we use a platform, or a framework rather, called Docassemble, which works on top of Python and then produces allows for the creation of guided interviews that will walk people through, provide them with context, and help them to fill out something. We were then producing PDF forms, which we then securely delivered to the court. And Docassemble has a lot of great built-in functionality, some of which we haven't actually been able to use yet because of capacity, but you actually can have live chat embedded in these forms to help people staff those forms while people are working on them. And of course, the question is, how do people find the forms? So we partnered with the court, and so they provided links to a subset of these forms on their website. There is a lot of referral that ends up going on where we've been partnering and working with advocates to help build these forms, and so they can direct people to them. And then, of course, we're collecting all these forms on our own website and shooting people that way as well. One of the features that we really, really like and which has been very useful is the ability for an advocate to be on the phone with someone, help them fill out the form, and then send them a link via a text message that then allows people to sign the form and then send it on to the court, all without these people having to be in the same physical space, which of course was a big push for us in COVID. Just to give you a quick idea to help make it a little more concrete, here's the actual site. And what I'm going to do is really quickly just run through a form so you can see a little bit of this. We built mobile first. This is all responsive website stuff here. And people just go through, they're asked a set of questions. This is a very simple form, but one of our largest forms is actually rather complex. And there are a lot of considerations to be made involving safety and making sure that people actually are filling out stuff that is going to not do more harm than good. And so allowing them to get to the information they need. It allows them to help figure out what court they would be filing in, even though they're not physically going there. And you can just sort of get the idea here. This is the sense. We have a lot of built-in features that we sort of get for free with Docassemble. There's built-in text reader, text-to-speech. There are a lot of things we've built in to do things like help fill out email address or actually physical addresses using Google lookup to help make sure that we get valid street addresses. And then in the end, what you're going to end up with is a nice PDF. You can preview, then you can sign it either on your device by texting it to yourself or to someone else if you're helping fill that out. And then it will then go ahead, produce that PDF, which is the format that the court had requested. And then I will not finish this here because I do not want to actually send off this form to the court, but this would then, you know, we could possibly send it off to the court. And so that is that. You also can go back on some of the forms, go back and of course revisit previous information. So that's sort of what the forms look like, what they are. We developed, this is all in open source. And so DocAssemble is an open source framework. It's not just as simple as having a YAML file to sort of specify what's going on, but it uses a mix of YAML and Python to be able to specify what you want to happen. We've done some development in the back end to add new functions and features. Here is their playground. For someone with any development background, it's a very easy learning curve, I think. Well, not entirely, because Michelle's going to argue with me about execution order and stuff, but well, nonetheless, the point is, I'm coming from an attorney's standpoint, where even for attorneys, we actually can get my law students and some other people up on this. We actually were very lucky. One of our staff at the lab where I work is a housing attorney who just joined us. He had already built a really great eviction tool in DocAssemble previously, and we were able to leverage a lot of his experience and know-how. And DocAssemble actually is becoming a rather mature little open source project. There are a lot of companies and organizations that now build on top of it. So Upsolve is a nationally recognized bankruptcy assistance. It's a nonprofit that helps people deal with bankruptcies, and they are built on DocAssemble. There are even companies that have built up on top of it to provide a nice GUI on top of the framework. So that people can actually sort of drag and drop and create automated documents. So here are a couple of them there. But really the thing that made this all happen was our volunteers. So we have over 200 folks on our Slack. We have about a core set of volunteers, about 50 folks who really contributed stuff. And we have contributors in 5 continents across 11 time zones. So it really was the people that made this happen. And the great thing there was that we had a true diversity of volunteers with experience as attorneys, law students, plain language experts, designers, although not as many designers as we would have liked, coders, and a bunch of folks that then meant that we could make everything work. And something that this audience I think will particularly like, when we made our agreement with the court to build this and say, hey, we're gonna build this thing, are you gonna accept it? There's actually a complete copy of an MIT license in the memorandum of understanding with the court, which is to say that everything we were producing, not only did we produce it open, we produced in the open, so actually you can see videos of all of our daily stand-up meetings, which have now turned into bi-weekly meetings. But there's actually, everything is open sourced under an MIT license and available for other people to adapt and work with. And so the thing that really made this possible was that open source ethos brought in a bunch of volunteers from all over, knowing that the work that we were going to be able to create was not going to be locked up in something, and it was actually going to help people. And this was a time when people actually really wanted to help. And I think that really pushed us forward. And then of course, our approach was just to do not standard as of 5 years ago, but standard now, industry practice of doing a user-centered iterative design and deployment. So we really were big on that iterative movement. But for moving from here, I'm going to hand off to Michelle and let her talk more about some of the specific constraints and stuff that we had to face.
Thanks, David. So of course we had a lot of aspirations, but then there's time, and not just time, limited resource, and a budget of $0, just like many brigade projects have experienced. But what really helped us through this was, for example, the community that we formed, the project managers that had supplementary skill sets, and a big part of how we managed to make this work was communication between each other when we were hitting our limitations and when we needed to pick up from each other. And there we were very lucky. That kind of finding these kinds of people is hard to do, and we lucked out in a lot of ways. We've been creating what we hope is a replicable process, and that's part of how we move this project along, ways from checklists, labeling PDFs so they can be run through a wizard that generates code that takes care of a bunch of boilerplate and gives a very basic starting place for the coder while still allowing them flexibility, and through to SME review and testing, kind of an iterative cycle there. And it took us some experimentation to get a realistic idea of what we could produce. As David shows on the slide, it's a very specific form of iteration, which you don't want to try and start with a wheel and then two wheels and make your way to a car. You want something that's rideable all the way along, something that will get you there faster and further at each step of the way, starting with a skateboard and working way up to a bicycle and then a car, right? So the very base goal of each form is to make something that helps more people get what they need. So something better than a PDF was our starting point. Later on, plain language and giving context to the user so that they can fill forms out better, faster, so that they can understand how this is going to affect their lives. But an MVP is a decent idea, but there are some dangers in this process that we had to account for when thinking about MVPs. MVP is not always just better than the PDF. For example, with the 209A, I think it's called the Prevention of Abuse Order, PDF is not enough. Just better than PDF is not enough to keep people safe. It's just, for example, the PDF for your affidavit where you, go ahead.
You might just want to say that's what most people would think of like as a restraining order. So.
Okay, yeah, there you go. So for example, on the PDF, there is a blank page where you are supposed to put everything that has happened in your relationship with your abuser. And it says nothing. There's no clues, there's no anything, and people don't know what to tell the judge. People are in crisis situation. They're not in a place where they can come up with the appropriate details that will get them the help that they need. And our form helps by asking them questions, making sure they have included the details that someone would need to understand the context of their situation. Another example is we include a motion to impound your order, and that means to keep it private so that your abuser does not know that you are filling out a court order, because that can create a lot of danger for the person filling it out, and it's not provided with the PDF. So we have forms that people with, half a month of coding experience can build in a couple of weeks. We have the 209A that dozens of advocates and several experienced coders worked on for 3 months, which is only 3 months, by the way, because it wouldn't have been possible to do that without this process and without having people that have been living this work for decades already, who have been working on this. So next slide. Code for America talks a lot about building with, not for, and so do we. We found it really important to understand the stakeholders and context, and not just to guess what is actually involved in the process. I highly recommend looking at all levels of your ecosystem for people who already have the experience that you need in order to be able to make a tool that will actually help people. One of the strengths of this project has been that almost everyone on it, not including me, almost everyone, has been working with the communities we want to help, advocates and plain language experts and social workers and the courts. And we have worked with a ton of them, and we have consulted with even more throughout the community. Next slide. So we test because we can't trust ourselves to spot everything. And the more eyes we have, the better. And the more diverse those eyes are, the better, because we're going to see different things and not just technical bugs. We're going to see, though we have testing for that, and actually a lot of intensive Q&A hand testing as we're getting our automated testing framework in place, and Q&A will have to stick around, but there's testing of substance on different levels: legal, understandability, users' context and experience. All those kinds of things are things we need to send out for and get more eyes on. And there is where relationships with the community, which I'm very lucky to have fallen into a place where those relationships exist, really help to make a tool that is safe and helpful and helps people get the help they need during this difficult time, and hopefully onto the future, and hopefully is a process that can be replicated with other projects. That is a big part of this, is creating a process that we can provide to other projects and other needs. All right. So, and this is our, oh yeah, that's the slide that was supposed to be going, right?
Yes, or segue.
Yes, go, how about you go take this one, David?
So yeah, so that is our hope, that these are replicable things, and that's actually one of our successes. So our metrics are not just what forms we've gotten through and people we've helped there, but also growing the process and how we're approaching this. So our original agreement was with our trial courts, and actually that has gone well enough that our appeals court, as they're looking at the end of the housing moratorium, which is actually coming up tomorrow in our state, they were like, we need to do something to deal with all the appeals that are going to happen when people are being evicted and they want to appeal those. And so we're actually in the process of creating forms for them and signing a new memorandum of understanding with this different entity, which is the appeals court, to continue this project there. So we're seeing that as a success as we're taking what we learned there, moving on, and expanding it to other jurisdictions. Right now, still just in Massachusetts, but other jurisdictions. We've also succeeded in securing funding from Pew Charitable Trust to help hire a full-time Python developer, so that we're not, because the thing is, we've been working on volunteer work for many months now. We have 2 staff members in my lab, which will be working on this a large part of the time, myself and Quentin Stainhouse, who is the housing attorney I mentioned before, who is the one who created the great DocAssemble product that we've been leveraging. And so we're doing that now, and that is explicitly going to be work to help expand this to other jurisdictions with an eye towards finishing that last bit of work where instead of just delivering a PDF, we actually delivered structured data to the case management systems of individual courts. So that's money and a position specifically looking at helping connect the dots. So we have this nice open source stack of tools that can do everything from create these interviews and the documents and send those documents along with structured data directly to courts so they can go right into their case management systems. If that's something that's exciting to you, find me on Twitter or DM me or something, because we are still actively looking, although we'll probably have our first line of interviews next week. So if you're interested, move fast. But yeah, so that's another one of our successes, the fact that we have other jurisdictions that are interested and people who are interested to help us move there. So we feel it's been validated. Again, this is a project that in months we've done something that normally would have taken years. I was on a call yesterday where we were presenting this project. A very similar group had done something in another jurisdiction. Their project had been going for 4 years, and I venture to guess they spent a lot more than $0 on it. We did in 4 months, normally what it would have been 4 years, because of the enormous generosity of people who during this time of need really wanted to step up and help. And I mean, that's definitely, the spirit of Code for America. And so I'm glad to, I hope other people are inspired by that, and we're willing to help talk about our process and share whatever we can. That being said, we can move into questions. We did manage to time it so that we're not right up against the wall. If people want to throw things, and there are both of our beautiful pictures and us on Slack and on Twitter if you want to get a hold of us. But if people have questions, and you see there are still our Slack, but now we have a thing that says questions. We can take them in the chat, or we can try to navigate those however people would best feel to try to do this in this time we have left.
And I'm on the Code for America Slack. So my name is Michelle, she, her, Code for Boston. And if you get in touch, I can give more details on the process and the tools we've used. And yep. But in the meantime, since we're here, yes, if people have questions.
Oh, and look, I see some familiar names in here. So actually, Speak of the Devil, Quentin Stainhouse, who I had just mentioned. I don't know if he was there when I was talking about him, but maybe his ears were burning. So I have a question from Eric. How do you work with the court system to be able to submit forms directly to them that are trusted? So that came about in large part because of the relationships that existed. So I operate out of a law lab in one of the law schools here in Massachusetts, and I was the co-chair of a committee that was formed around a task force for COVID-19. So that actually because of some existing networking and understanding meant that we were able to directly communicate with them. And it was our Access to Justice Commission, which most states have something like an Access to Justice Commission, which is usually sort of a not court body, but sort of parallel body that is interested in access to justice issues. And it was them who were actually able to make the meetings happen. And so making those meetings happen are what then led us to be able to do something trusted with the courts. Other questions? We could get into that whole thing about DACA symbol and the weird execution order.
Oh, I'd be happy to go there.
So whatever.
And the Trello boards. Yeah. Oh my God,
yes.
The Trello boards. Yeah, I mean, there's theories there that several of the other project managers worked through to create a process that can get things through without things getting lost and without things getting confused, right? Like, oh gosh, if Maeve were here.
And we're
what? Sorry, go ahead, David.
Yeah, we're standardizing those processes. So one of the things that we should be coming out with as part of our grant is releasing all that documentation. And you can find all that documentation now. We have everything available off of our GitHub. And we do all of most of our communications via a Slack channel, which is available off our project page. If you go to, I suppose I should show you the actual project page. If you go to, here's the MassAccess page. There's actually the About page for MassAccess. If you go there, you can find more about what we call the assembly line, which is the creation project, and you can find our contact info there. Someone like the
do I give that tone of voice about the Trello cards? They were and are invaluable in this process. The organizing the information and organizing your team, I can't emphasize how much that has affected our process. I think there's another question.
It makes me think of the recent social safety net audit we did recently at Brigade Network. There's more focus on the user-friendly component of the forms. Can these forms be scaled and used in other ways, for instance, social safety net? So the platform we're using, we're trying to make it independent of the forms. Each form has a lot of information that goes into it because you have to deal with subject matter experts. All the forms, everything we've done is open source though and available on our GitHub. So the real question is, how much tinkering do you have to do? I think you'd have to start most forms from, one of the things we are doing is we're building up a uniform of basic questions, which actually can be transferred. So we have a whole naming convention. If you name variables in your form a certain way, we run them through a wizard that Quentin built, and then it actually can get you part of the way there by creating some of the code, so you don't have to start from scratch.
And these questions will be updated and translated. So if you use them, you're going to be able to take advantage of the new improved questions. But you can also use that model. If you look at the kind of the way the data structure is arranged, you can use that model to build up, a set of forms that have commonalities, like for the safety net and so on and so forth. I mean, this platform is agnostic of what you want to do with it. It was built with the legal community in mind, but it can be any questions you want to ask it. It's encrypted end to end. You can have users, you can have administrators. It comes with all that built in.
The texting features are all easy to turn on. You just get your Trello account and plug in your API key, similar with other features. And someone liked the mug. I just have to say, my brother-in-law made this. He's a potter, and so yeah, cool mug. Someone liked it in the chat. So there we go. Well, he's not a potter full-time. He's a software engineer full-time, but does a pottery. Pretty good too.
Comes in the family. Yeah. Also interesting to learn of your experience about developing partnership with local government and do's and don'ts in terms of building that relationship and trust.
Work with people who want to work with you, which either means find the people who already want to work with you or convince people that it's their idea that they want to work with you. I mean, we were in a very unique situation given COVID, that a lot of people were open to things that I don't think otherwise they would have been, and people were willing to step out of their comfort zones. And it really was a mentality that opened up people and made for a lot of opportunity. Right now, I think the key is for us to make sure that there isn't backsliding on some of that, and to keep, and also that we don't just incorporate, courts plus Zoom and think that that is innovation. We want to avoid a situation where everyone just did the shiny toy. We did something that was very specific. It was very much about how does someone with just a phone access the courts? And so we carved off a very small thing for us to do, and we did that. And so as far as do's and don'ts, I mean, you really do have to find someone who's going to be a partner. It's very hard to collaborate with someone if they don't want to collaborate with you. So hopefully projects like this help make that value proposition easier for you to explain, so that you can show them that this is actually it's not going to be the end of the world, and things can change and be better.
There's a question. Can you talk about figuring out?
Oh yeah, the Sharon Salter. That's yes. They've done excellent work.
That is not the question.
But Quentin has mentioned there's a lot of excellent work that has been done in other jurisdictions to make sure that you're not, when you're moving courts online and stuff like that, that you're not just taking the existing process and paving cow paths, right? You want to actually ask, how should this be designed, and take a user-centered approach. And that's something that we did a lot based upon the experience people in our group had. So we have someone who's been working on a version of this for the last 7 years, but they were just one person working on it at a nonprofit. And so we were able to bring them as part of the team, and we got all of that experience and all of that work they'd already done. And that's Caroline Robinson, if anyone's interested. She's been doing this for 7 years, and it's amazing work.
Can you talk about figuring out how to let the submitter know the form made it to the court system and was accepted, and has the right info in the right place? Does the submitter receive a copy of the PDF?
Yeah, they can receive a copy. Some of this, so one of the things is, as lawyers, I like to remind people, not everything has to be a technical solution. So some of this we did contractually, although not actual contractually, through the MOU. So part of our agreement with the court was that we would deliver it to them, and then someone from the court would contact the person by the close of the next business day. And so that allowed us to close that loop. I mean, of course, then people can also CC themselves on the communication, the original communication to the court. But yeah, not everything has to have a technical solution. Sometimes process is the way to go. And also that nimbleness of process allowed us to do a lot of other things, right? So people always ask, well, what about verification and e-signatures? In Massachusetts, that hasn't been an issue. We've had e-signatures for a while, but just in case there was any doubt, there were special standing orders issued by the court to make sure that things were very clearly allowed. And then the MOU in place made it very clear that stuff that came from us as a deliverer to the courts was going to be accepted.
And someone mentioned that being responsive to feedback has been an important part of their work with the courts and other groups. And I think that has definitely been, there's been a back and forth. All the forms get reviews from the courts before getting the stamp of the court on them and before being submittable to the courts. And there can be back and forth on that and their comfort level with always being responsive and open. Yeah.
And we've also,
Robbie.
Yeah, and we've also tried to be free about that too. Not all of our forms go directly to the court, because we wanted to work on some stuff that we saw as priorities that the court didn't. So we have sort of two parallel tracks. We have forms that go to the court and have to get their approval to be sent to them directly. And then we have forms that individuals can download and then submit in whatever way they feel appropriate. And those tend to go out to a lot of social service advocates. They'll use them, people who are helping connect people with stuff. So we have those two parallel tracks. And so it's actually, the MOU with the court is very interesting because they're not our client, we're not their client. It was really just an agreement that if we do things in a certain way and they say, okay, they'll take our stuff and then call people back, that sort of thing. And Robbie had a question or something?
Well,
we need to wrap up now so that we have room for the next session, which starts at 1:30.
Okay.
Well, it's 1:30.
For joining. Is there a Slack channel on the CFA Slack that people can get in touch with you?
We could make one.
This will also be posted on Discourse, so so there'll be some more information about this.
I'll make a doc assembly line channel.
Great.
Or assembly line channel, actually, we're calling it now assembly line.
Well, thank you all very much. I'm going to have to end this meeting and restart. So if you have joined for the next session, I apologize, you'll have to rejoin. I will see you back here in a moment. There are also lightning talks going on at the same time if you are jumping over to that. So I'll see folks in a minute.
Thank you.